Please be seated. The court is now in session. As scheduled, today we will continue to hear the testimony of the civil party Ms. Saran. And another reserve civil party, that is TCCP 105. Mrs. Sakalbuti, could you report the attendance of the parties and individuals to the proceeding? Sakalbuti, Mr. President, all parties to the proceeding are present except the accused Ingsari, who is absent due to his health. However, based on his limited waiver document E237/1, he requires to waive his direct presence in the hearing of certain testimonies of civil parties, including TCCP 82, who will be continue to be heard by the trial chamber, as well as TCCP 105, who will be heard after the conclusion of the testimony of TCCP 82. Mr. Michael Kanavas, the International Counsel for Ingsari, is absent due to his personal commitment. TCCP 82 is present in the courtroom, and TCCP 105 is present in the waiting room awaiting the trial chamber's invitation. President, thank you. The floor is now given to the assigned lawyer for civil parties to continue putting questions to this civil party. You may proceed.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, your honors. Good morning to all of you in this courtroom, and good morning, Mr. Miesaran. We are going to speak about your personal history again, and what happened to you after this obligation to leave your work in Phnom Penh, as thousands of other people who were evacuated from Phnom Penh on 17 April and on 18 April 1975. You explained to us that you were able to cross the Monimong Bridge in the end, although there were many, many people, and you were hoping to return home after 2 to 3 days, and you thought that that would be possible. You told us that you noticed that this was all made up and that this was not possible, and then you waited some more. You didn't answer the call of the Khmer Rouge asking officials and servicemen to return to the city, and you stayed, therefore, around this bridge, the Monivong Bridge, with other people. So my question is the following. Why did you stay there? Why didn't you continue heading south, whereas your family was living in the province of Svay Rieng, and you were leaving?
Civil Party, good morning, Mr. President. Allow me to respond to this question. My wife never knew my native village as we got married in Sisapon. and we did not go to Svay Rieng province. So I did not imagine that my wife would go to my native village, and I made a decision to locate my wife in her native village.
Quand avez-vous décidé?
When did you decide to go down to your wife's native village? Because you told us that you stayed for several days on the riverside after the Monivong Bridge. So what made you decide then to move on?
So initially we were instructed to leave Phnom Penh for 3 days, and during these 3 days it was so difficult while we were en route, and then we crossed the Monivong Bridge. After the 3 days passed, and there was still a large number of people on the other side of the bridge. I was still waiting for my wife, and I still had a hope that I would be allowed to return after the 3 days period. I was very worried about my wife as she was pregnant and she did not know Phnom Penh that well. And after the 3 days passed, I was looking for my wife among the crowd of people who were still crossing the bridge. In the end, I became hopeless, and I had to find any means in order to find my wife in her native village.
Je crois.
Maybe I wasn't quite clear enough. The question is, at some point in time you decided to leave the riverbank. In other words, something happened. Did you take this decision on your own? If so, why? After the 3 days in which you felt so disappointed and you weren't able to go back into Phnom Penh, then you took the subsequent decision. Can you tell us about that?
My apology, Mr. President. I only heard the French language through my headset, not the Khmer language.
Je vais peut-être reposer.
Perhaps I should ask the question again so that you can understand me fully. What I was asking was there some kind of event which made you decide to leave the riverbank? You wanted to go towards your wife's village, but how did you make this decision to leave the riverbank, and when you went, were you alone or with other people?
After the 3 days passed, there was an announcement on the loudspeaker from Phnom Penh appealing for officials to return to work in Phnom Penh. And I saw some people returning to Phnom Penh. But those people, when they went to Phnom Penh, they went by themselves without members of their family, and I didn't see them return. And with that, I thought something's wrong happened in Phnom Penh. And I was concerned about that issue, and also I was concerned about my wife, so I decided to go and look for my wife. And that was the reason why I decided to look for my wife. And I also saw some dead bodies at the bridge. And that I did not see those people who returned to Phnom Penh come back to their family members who were waiting. And while I was at Khmer Thonot, I was not given any food to eat. And I believe some other people who were there with me also decided to return to their native villages.
Donc, si je comprends bien.
So if I get this right, you left with other people in order to try and get back to your wife's native village. In your complaint, ERN French 00362204, Khmer 00362176, English 00362196. And here you tell us that you took Route 6 and you went through Kampong Tom, Siem Reap, reached Battambang, and eventually your wife's village, which is near Sisawan. So the question is this: when you took that route, were you travelling with other people who had been with you on the riverbank? And how did the first stage of the journey go? Can you describe your journey when you started walking along National Road number 6?
I decided to leave National Road number 1, that is from the other side of the Moniving Bridge. There was another group of people who also wanted to leave. And the people who were there had a boat. And then we asked them to take us across, but they did not guarantee that they would take us across the river in exchange for some money. But at that time we did not have money. We had some gold, and those people also had a motorbike, and then we crossed the river to the other side of Churuyongwa Bridge, and there was no people there at Churuyongwa. It was empty. And along that road, that is road number 6, there were some Khmerus traveling on motorbikes, traveling up and down, and they were armed. So I traveled on that national road. up to the junction to go to Prekadam and to Siem Reap. And while I was en route, I saw other people traveling on foot as well. I didn't know them. But at that time, I had some rice and some sugar that I took from the warehouse in Cambodia. I put them on the motorbike and I pushed that motorbike up to Bathi. And during my journey from that road juncture to Bathi, I saw Khmer Rouge soldiers traveling on trucks and on motorbikes toward Phnom Penh, and some were traveling on the opposite direction. Those soldiers, however, did not ask me any questions or ask where I was heading to. However, upon reaching Bathi, there was a checkpoint, and I was questioned amongst other peoples. We were questioned one by one, and that was the time that the Khmer Rouge requested the motorbike that we were pushed, that we pushed from Phnom Penh with some other belongings on that motorbike. So that what happened at Bathi, and later after they took away our motorbike, in fact, the Khmer Rouge said they did not want the motorbike, they only wanted the battery from the motorbike so that they could use it to hook up to a radio to listen. So then I took back the motorbike and I made it into a postcard. Then there were villagers who came from their villages to the national road. Of course, at the national road, I saw empty houses and there were no people there. So since the motorbike could not go without the battery, I turned it into a postcard by using some other wood so that it could carry more goods. And those people who travel along with me also put their belongings onto that card. As for the villagers who came to see us, they asked us whether we have any fuel or any medicine. So I exchanged what we had for rice. I gave them the medicine. There were about 6 or 7 of them who came to meet us in order to look for what could be exchanged. So I exchanged what we had for rice and for sugar. And at that time, I did not ask them any questions, but they told us about the living condition there. And they told us that we had to be careful and not to do anything silly, especially not to interact with women. And that was the first time that I heard of the word Onka. The word Onka was heard while I was at Paau. And of course, I did not bother much about whether I should interact with any women, as I was still looking for my wife. And after that, there was a checkpoint where we were stopped and questioned. And from my observation, from the time that we left Pa'av, those people who had been asked kept disappearing gradually. And I clearly recall that there was one senior military officer who concealed his identity. His name was Suong, and he traveled by covering his face with a scarf. And of course, he had a worrying look on his face. Through each step of being questioned, as we were questioned in details as to where our native village was and what work that we did in Phnom Penh. As in my case, I was asked where I was born, what my parents' names were, whether I was married or not, and whether I worked. And Mr. President, at that time, I told them lies. I told them that I was a taxi driver, but in fact, I had never driven any taxi up to then. So I lied to them, and that I told them that my village was just the next village, and I was allowed to go. But for others, they were not lucky and they were taken. We were not the villagers, and there were no other villagers nearby there. There were only soldiers. So we were questioned, and some of us were taken away, but I didn't know what happened to them. And that process continued until I arrived at my wife's native village. My apology for talking a bit long to respond to this question.
Mr. Mirsalan, you've just told us that you lied. Why did you lie? Why did you tell lies to the Khmer Rouge when they asked you who you were and what your job was?
Frankly speaking, I did not trust them. I did not trust them because I observed that people who were called to return to Phnom Penh, they never returned. And I knew that I did not trust them because they talk about the imminent bombardment and that we had to be evacuated for 3 days only, but they lied. That did not happen. And of course, if people were allowed to leave Phnom Penh and allowed to return, then people would survive. But that did not happen. So, with all these reasonings behind, I decided that I have to lie to them. And that's the reason behind this.
Pardon.
Before you reached your wife's village, you went through Kampong Thom, Siem Reap and other towns. And what sort of a state were those places in? Did anything in particular strike you?
I crossed Kampong Thom province and Siem Reap province. And along the road that I traveled, there were no villagers. There were only groups of soldiers here and there. And in the provincial town, there were only empty houses. I stayed for quite some time in Kampong Thom as we were questioned by the Khmer Rouge. And there were no people in the provincial town. There were only soldiers. And those people and I saw some people who wept. And let me repeat once again, in the provincial town of Kampong Thom and Siem Reap, there were no people, no villagers. And amongst the groups that I traveled with, we were instructed to move forward and not to stay in those empty houses.
Pardon. Quand vous
When you got to the village, you went to your in-laws, your wife was not there. What happened next? And did you think the village had changed? Did you have to go and declare yourself somewhere? How did all of that work out?
When I arrived at that village, my mother-in-law cried because she did not see my wife. And I myself, was also disappointed as I did not see my wife. And we were asked to live separately. There were those native villagers and there were other villagers who came from Mongkol Barait and Sisapon. My mother-in-law told me that Angkas hid eyes everywhere, and that she told me to go and present myself to Angka. And on my first day, I did do that. That I was a nurse at the Bracket Mili Hospital, and that my wife was living in that native village, and I was looking for my wife. And that's what I told them. I told them the truth, because my mother-in-law told me to tell them the truth.
Oui, et
And apart from that, you were known in the village. In your narrative, you say that very shortly afterwards, 2 or 3 days later, you were received a visit from the village chief saying that he was coming to look for medicines. It's the same ERN as before. And you were asked to go and select some drugs and medicines, and then you were taken off, placed before some Khmer Rouge people, and you were told that you were going to be sent back to your home because the villagers were going to take action with the Khmer Rouge. And then, 3 days later, you were summoned with all of the village to a meeting. Now, can you tell us briefly, we're rather short of time here, what actually happened there and how, when all was said and done, you were arrested? After having been released, you were arrested again 2 days later. Can you give us an overview of how those few days after your arrival went?
Allow me to respond briefly to this question, Mr. President. Upon my arrival, I told them the truth that I was a nurse at the Bracket Mili Hospital. And 3 days later, at 10 p.m., the chief of the village came to call me to go and look at the medicine that they received from China. And I immediately realized that something was going on, as I was called at 10 o'clock at night. But I decided to go along with the chief of the village. Upon we reached the the border of the village. They arrested me and tied me up. And the killing place was to the west of the village. Those students who were living in the village and who came from the provincial town or city came to appeal to them that I should not be killed, I should be sent for re-education instead. And there were a number of those villagers who came to appeal to the Khmer Rouge group. And at that time, the Khmer Rouge discussed amongst themselves, and then they came and they said they saw a B-40 rocket launcher, and they warned those villagers that they had to guarantee that I would not flee, otherwise just one rocket launcher would kill them all. So I returned back to the village, and 3 days later, a large group of soldiers came to arrest me again and took me to Sisapon. And before I left the village, I saw one of them carrying a club, and I thought that they would beat me with that club. And I was put in the prison in Sisapon.
Vous dites
In your narrative, you say that others as well were taken to Sisapon in the military truck, that there were 10 or 12 families that were also arrested and taken away. Tell us, please, who those families were.
Those 12 families were also called to go, and I was also called to go with them. And the 12 families were not the native villagers. They came from the city as well. And probably they came to the village during the time that they came as well. And I talked about families. I refer to the wife, the husband, and their children. And I recall that there was one man who is living in Switzerland today. He was also called. So we were all put onto a truck. And amongst the 12 families, there were 2 couples who did not have any kid.
quand vous êtes
And then when you got to Sisapon, you said that at the beginning you were put in the lycée, in a classroom that had been requisitioned and turned into a detention centre. And 2 or 3 days after that, you were summoned and beaten in order to get a confession out of you. Can you tell us what happened at that juncture, and if the same treatment was meted out to everybody? In other words, if they were seeking confessions from everybody.
Response. When I was placed in a room with other 12 families at the lycée in Sisapon, on the 3rd night I was summoned. Indeed, during the 2 previous nights there was raining cat and dog, and I was summoned to be questioned, interrogated. I was asked whether I got married, where I was born, and my occupation. I didn't understand about this because when I told them that I worked as a nurse or a doctor, then I was beaten severely. And they accused me of being an American doctor, and they tortured me time and again. And later on, I was dragged to another location. I didn't know I was dragged because I went unconscious on several occasions during the ordeal. My shirt was torn apart, and that did not happen only to me. Other people were also treated like that. And I have no idea what happened to other members of the 12 families who end up being there with me on that day.
You also explain that at the end of this terrible episode in this high school in Sisapon, everyone was taken to a room in order to be re-educated. Can you tell us a bit about what this re-education was?
Response. Well, when I regained consciousness, I could see that fewer people left in the room, and a few days later another group was seen coming in at night, and there was an army jeep coming with soldiers, and it was raining hard again, and I was summoned to a room where we were placed, and the senior person of the group produced a piece of paper starting to call out names, and I happened to be the first person to be called. And then they asked me whether I was terrified. They didn't ask me any other questions other than this. And I was indeed terrified, and I did say that to them. They could see me. And the people who talked during that time was, the topic of the discussion was about the rich and the poor, and also the revolution in France in 1889. And we were lectured on this. They talked at length about this. I didn't understand why we were told all about this. And these people, to my belief, were educated people.
So in the end, this Khmer Rouge leader gave the order to release you, and then you returned to the village. But when you returned to the village, what happened? Were you treated as the villagers, or were you, as you said earlier, cast aside because you did not belong to the same category as the villagers?
Response. Upon returning, frankly, at the beginning I did not imagine that I would be allowed to return. I could have been killed. I then was transferred to a location near the national road. And then a soldier told me or other villagers to go home. Rumor was already spread about my death. People didn't believe that I could come back home. And when I was there, no one among the villagers there come to see me. I do not know why, but they perhaps were very terrified.
This will be one of my last questions, Mr. Mayor Saran. So you returned to the village and you stayed there until May 1978, and then you decided to leave because you were told that you were going to be arrested, as you told us, and that you would be killed. So between the moment when you returned and the moment you left the village, did you lead the life of the peasants, of the base people in that village? Were you among these base people, or did they place you in another category, which was later called the new people, which you speak about in your account? Did you have the feeling that you were alienated, or that you were treated in a way that was different from the way the villagers were treated?
Response. You mentioned about other villages. I had no idea what happened to these villages because I couldn't move about freely. But allow me to express clearly that there were people who came from Mongolborei and also from Phnom Penh who were placed together in a group. Again, discussion was not allowed, and people had no gut to even converse with one another. And in particular, since I came from Sisapon prison, I was a kind of object that was that posed some kind of risk to them being associated with me. So no one would want to converse or to talk anything to me. And I lived in a place where there was a grandfather who advised me on several issues, including my safety. He asked me to keep silence and to, of course, be very careful when speaking.
So after your return, were there meetings, first of all, in this meeting, meetings that you were obliged to attend during the day or in the evening? And did you see people being arrested? Yes, indeed. Did you see people being arrested?
Response. I would only talk about what I saw. And upon returning, I saw people being made to dig the canals. And the work site was near the village. But at the same time, when I was asked to tend the ducks, I had also been made to dig the canals. And at that moment, I saw a person being arrested. I knew this person before. He was a soldier, and he was removed after being arrested at the work site. That man, after knowing that he was to be removed, he was very weak, mentally weak, and terrified. And on another occasion, I saw another man who had an affair with a woman who had to be arrested and executed right in front of the meeting. The meeting was convened every late afternoon. and the topic of the meeting would just be business as usual. For example, about the rice production, about how many hectares rice per hectare, things like that. And I was also asked to express my sincerity and loyalty of being honest and commitment during each meeting. And we were supposed to be able to say things out loud. For example, when we made our commitment, then we had to make sure that our composure was really strong and firm, and say that we hated the American imperialists, or go or down to hell the Americans. But that one person who was on his feet was not good at doing that, and he was about to be in big trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Miyasaran. I will stop here. Thank you. I am now going to give the floor to the prosecutors. Thank you.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to you as well as to all of the parties and to the public, and to you, Mr. Miyasaran. My name is Vincent de Wilde, and I'm going to put questions to you on behalf of the co-prosecutor's office, and this should take me about 20 to 25 minutes. And if the civil party answers my questions precisely. So I'm going to focus essentially on what happened during the evacuation. And first of all, I will ask you questions about the surgical center where you said that you treated injured people up to the 17th of April. Could you call this an emergency ward? Would this be called an emergency ward today?
Response. At Borei Kaila, at that time, I was working at a surgical center. There were 5 surgical sections that were meant to receive wounded people. This is the first place where the wounded would be admitted to. And we received both students, student trainees who came to practice their skills there. So they were indeed the students or interns.
Thank you. You spoke about the 5 operating theaters often, but were there other wards in this center, such as anesthesia, radiology, or was there only one place where people would be operated?
Response. At these 5 operating theaters, the kind of medicines you mentioned were available. Indeed, before people were operated on, they had to be administered these kind of medicine. So they were there. I have to say that they were available. And that there was no section where women gave birth to their babies. There were only sections to receive the wounded.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to know, because you said last time that there were 50 beds on the ground floor. What was the total amount of available beds in that center? Were there also beds on the upper floors?
Response. At Borai Kaila, it was only meant for football or for basketball, and it was surrounded by the wall. And now they use the place for boxing ring. And at that time there were hospital beds. I can't count all the beds, but these beds were only for the wounded people and their family members who accompanied them to the place. And upstairs, it was on the 17th of April. People who died during the evening of the 16th of April would be left unattended there.
You also told us last week that there were many injured people who kept on coming on the 17th of April, as well as during the night of April 16 to April 17, and that there were also injured people lying on the floor in the corridors. So can you give us an idea of how many injured people there were in the center, in the surgical center, on the morning of 17 April 1975? If you don't know the exact number, I understand, but please give us just an idea.
Response. There were 5 sections for receiving the wounded. And on the 16th of April, there were bombs dropped at Doi Mek market. People got injured and sent there. And I cannot remember the number of the patients. But each center kept receiving the wounded, and the beds could not accompany or accommodate all the wounded, and we had to make use the floor for incoming patients and wounded people.
Thank you. So among all of these injured people, how many of them were able to move about on their own despite their injuries, or how many people needed continuous assistance and who could not move about on their own?
Response. People who were on the beds whom I saw were received, and I saw them. Those some people were not seriously injured and they could move about. Some got injured by the legs who indeed could not walk, and they could remain in the beds. And I may also wish to recall the event of a young child who was seriously injured, the 7-year-old child who told me that he got injured by the bomb, and that child was lying on the ground, and I could then save the person when he or she was evacuated from the hospital.
Thank you. last week you also said that certain families came to the hospital to take away with them some people who were lightly injured. But as far as you know, were all families able to come to the surgical center? Were all of these families contacted in time?
Response. On the morning of 17th of April, when we were told that we had to leave, the people who were in the hospital were started to panic, and some who could walk then would walk out. Some had to be in the beds where they were being pushed. I don't know where they could go because they couldn't walk, and I did not know where the beds could be pushed further.
Thank you. As a nurse, you dedicated your life to treating people, to saving lives, and were you shocked by the Khmer Rouge order to evacuate Boré-Kéla totally, including evacuating people who were very seriously injured?
Response. I decided to become a doctor, and my mother did tell me to become a doctor, not a soldier, and I dedicated my life helping the people, the patients, including the wounded Khmer Rouge soldiers. 2 of them were treated by me, and at the moment when I was asked to leave the city, had a difficult feeling, because at that time I thought that the sick or the wounded would be well assisted during the evacuation. But at the same time, I was not clear in my mind whether these people were properly treated, because I still recall the event when a girl who got seriously injured begging, asking me to help her out, and I was also helpless, and I indeed was obliged to help her as a doctor, but I couldn't help her beyond what I could at that time.
Thank you. Last week you also said that you were still hoping at around 10 o'clock in the morning that the Khmer Rouge would continue administering treatment to the patients. You had this idea that it was not believable that the Khmer Rouge would let the situation be the way it was. So before you left the surgical center, did you see Khmer Rouge medical staff arrive at the center and take charge of treating the patients?
Response. At that time, none of the Khmer Rouge medical staff or soldier would be there to take charge of the hospital. I did not know what happened after this, but during that time it was sure that no one was seen to be there to assist the medical staff during the evacuation.
Mr. President, with your leave, I would like to read out short excerpts of Nunchea's examination during the hearing of 30 January 2012 regarding the evacuation of Phnom Penh, and the questions put to him by the co-prosecutors are based on the decision of the Central Committee taken in June 1974 to evacuate Phnom Penh. This is document E1/35.1, E1/35.1, and this is the transcript of the hearing of 30 January 2012. And I'm going to read 3 short excerpts before I put the necessary questions to the civil party. The first passage in Khmer is on page 23. At 9:57, and ERN is 00773623. In French, page 19, ERN 00.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, could you repeat the ERN numbers again as that they were not properly rendered?
Merci, Monsieur. J'irai plus longtemps.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, I will proceed a bit slower. So, Khmer ERN is 00773623. French, on page 19, ERN 00775545. And English, page 18, ERN 00775448. So, a question is being put to the accused. I understand that a committee had been created, but when the Central Committee took its decision in 1974, the decision was to evacuate all of the inhabitants. Was it to evacuate all of the inhabitants of Phnom Penh? Nunchia answers, yes, that's true, but in a temporary manner, because we were watching the situation closely and there was conflict at the time. End of quote. So the second excerpt, it's on the following page. So Khmer, page 24, at 10 o'clock. French, page 20, and English, page 19. So the question that is put by the co-prosecutor, the Central Committee decided that all inhabitants had to be evacuated. This means, therefore, that the injured also had to be evacuated from Phnom Penh. Is that so? Answer, and I quote, everyone was evacuated. So those people who had bicycles had to help the others, and those who had more strength had to help those who were weaker so that they could leave the city. End of quote. And the third passage is at 10:01, French Khmer ERN, same page, same ERN, and in English it's on page 20. So the question that is put, the Central Committee made its decision to evacuate all the residents of Phnom Penh. Did you make any effort to determine how many hospitals there were in Phnom Penh and how many patients were in those hospitals? And the accused answers, and I quote, we did not think about that, Mr. President. How could we think about that? Because the situation was dire. And Nunchia continues, giving a long description here, but this is the passage I'd like to concentrate on. So my question is the following. Mr. Mia Saran, did you see Khmer Rouge on 17 April send vehicles or any forms of transportation means such as bicycles or cars to Borei Kela to evacuate the injured? Or did you see them try to organize the transportation of the injured by asking the ordinary citizens to help the injured with whatever transportation means were available to them? Did you see the Khmer Rouge do that?
Allow me to report to you, Mr. President, of what I witnessed on the 17th of April. There was no Khmerus coming to give any assistance on that day. There was none of them.
Merci.
Thank you. You were told that the hospital and the city had to be evacuated so as to save your own lives from an imminent bombardment by the US. Is it not rather paradoxical that at the same time as needing to save your lives from the bombing, you also had to sacrifice the patients in the hospital? So at that juncture, did you ask yourselves if there wasn't something a little bit contradictory about that, and did that generate any particular doubt in your mind about orders dispensed by the Khmer Rouge?
President Civil Party, please wait. The Defense Counsel for Kir Sampon, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning, Your Honours. Good morning to the parties. So far, I have remained seated. I don't want to level objections here. I know that we're listening to something special from a civil party, but I do have to object to this last question from the co-prosecutor. It's a complicated question, and it also encourages the civil party to express an opinion that is not based on his personal experience, but what he might have thought about this or that on the basis of, etc., etc. So there are a lot of ifs in this particular question, and I don't think it is connected directly to what the witness himself has experienced. He's been asked to extrapolate, and even from a civil party, I don't think this procedure is acceptable. The co-prosecutor, Mr. President, what I'm trying to find out is if, when these things happened, if the civil party had that particular reaction vis-à-vis what was happening. Did he have the time to have this kind of thought, or was he completely unable to think in those terms? This is not inappropriate. We're on the 17th of April here, and I'm asking the civil party to put himself mentally back into the situation and to tell us what he thought then.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, may I add something?
Mr. President, the International Council for Nunchi, are you referring to the subject being discussed?
Good morning, Mr. President. And good morning, everyone. I am indeed. What I wanted to say is I wanted to support my colleague's intervention, and I wanted to support the very last thing that the co-prosecutor said. It's relevant to know what's in the the civil party's mind, and to simply ask him what was in your mind, not to put paradoxes, as it was phrased, in his mind. So simply ask him what was in his mind. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
President, the objection and the ground for the objection is valid. The civil party, you are not required to respond to the last question. I noticed the assigned lawyer for civil parties on her feet, and that matter has been already ruled.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Civil party. You told us that all of the patients in the hospital, in the operating theatre, had to evacuate. And last week you told us that the evacuation was not properly organized by the Khmer Rouge, and that nothing had been done to provide assistance to those being evacuated. Now, you're a nurse. Tell us, can you, what the foreseeable consequences were of this kind of evacuation for the weakest patients and the most serious patients on the basis of their physical state? Were they ready to undertake a long trek in the April heat without any particular form of care?
In my capacity as a medical staff, and it was my obligation frankly speaking, I felt uncomfortable to leave the patients behind. I could not do anything more. In my mind, if I left them behind, one, they would die, and two, if the Khmer Rouge would come to help them, then they would survive. But the thing is, how could I assist them in my capacity? I couldn't help them much. And when I left with an uneased feeling. Some people had already gone before I left. And I was still thinking about my wife. So I felt uneasy when I left, because I left the patients behind, in particular the young girl, and I'm still haunted by her image.
Merci. Nous allons...
Thank you. Let us move on from the operating theatre. You're now outside in the street, and last week you told us that people in the street had said that you had to leave for 3 days, otherwise the bombs would fall down from the sky from the US. But did you hear any other justifications coming from the Khmer Rouge about why you had to leave the city, or was that the only reason you were given?
While I was still at Borkira, and I heard the instruction that we had to leave, because at that time it was still unclear as who actually gave the instructions to us. There were crowds of people, and we were told that we had to leave. Everyone had to leave because there would be bombardment. And for me, of course, I was scared of bombardment. So we were scared that we had to leave for 3 days to avoid the bombardment, and of course I believed it. But as it happened, no bomb was dropped. And I was thinking that, in fact, they told us a lie. I thought to myself that no bomb was dropped during the 3-day period. And I myself believe in that.
Merci. La semaine dernière...
Thank you. Last week, you told us in E144.1 of the 14th of November 2012, Khmer ERN 00861402. In French it's page 113, in English it's page 109, and you said, we were all told not to take too many things with us because we were only leaving for 3 days. Now, who was giving the orders not to take too many things?
We were told to leave for 3 days. I heard that from those people who were coming from upstairs and those who came from the other side on my floor. But I could not see exactly who actually gave instructions. They told me that they were told by the soldiers that we had to leave for 3 days. And they told me not to take many things with me because we had only to leave for 3 days. So, Mr. President, I could not tell you exactly as who actually spoke those words, as I only heard it through other people. I was not told by any particular individual.
Merci.
Thank you. Why, when you went back home, did you only take a shirt of your wives and no other valuables or even a car?
Allow me to respond briefly. My wife was still at a pastor library because on that night I was on the guard duty, so I could not allow my wife to be alone at our house near Mohammedan Pagoda. I, at that time, tried to go and see my wife at the house, but I was not allowed to go as there was fighting going on from that direction, and I was told not to go there. So I went on the other direction and I entered my house. I had a bottle of aspirin. It was a 1,000 tablet aspirin. I took that one along with my wife's shirt. I was scared as the neighbors had already left. So I also brought along my wife's necklace with these other two stuff. It was already quiet as many neighbors had already gone, and I did not think I should bring more things because it was already told only 3 days. President, the prosecutor, can you inform us if you need more time to conclude?
Mr. President, ideally I would need another 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know if you wish me to continue now or perhaps after a break.
President, the time is appropriate for a break. We shall take a 20-minute break and return at 11 a.m. Court officer, could you assist the civil party during the break and have him return to the courtroom at 11 a.m. I notice the International Council for Nunchi is on his feet. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've just been informed that our client is unwell. He's suffering from a lack of concentration, a headache, a backache, and possibly high blood pressure. He would like to retire to the holding cell for the remainder of the day, and we will produce whatever waiver is necessary.
President, has his health been checked by the treating doctor yet?
Well, Your Honor, you know the answer to that question. You've seen him sitting in court all morning. Obviously, no. The answer is no. He has not been checked by the treating physician. He's been sitting behind me all morning, as you are well aware. Perhaps it's a good idea to ask the doctor. I'm not sure if the doctor has seen Mr. Nguyen Chia early this morning or last night or any time in the near future, but perhaps it's a good idea to ask the doctor, as I think he's here.
President, during the break, the doctor will check the health of Mr. Nguyen Chia and inform the chamber immediately, and the chamber will decide on this issue after we return.
Thank you.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ